think none of us, or not none of us, but very few people in today's society accept Nick's view, because they use contraception that destroys early embryos, they use the IED, they have abortions, they use IVF. All of these practices result in predictable loss. 100,000 abortions in Australia each year. We have laws requiring the destruction of embryos, and we don't have laws requiring the killing of innocent human beings. And that just shows that the embryo, if it is a human being, is a different kind of human being, and it doesn't have the moral status of a person. Well, it's not just that it doesn't have friends, it doesn't have the moral status of it.
Well, it shows that that's the way we approach it. It doesn't necessarily show that that's not something that could be rethought, though, does it?
Well, of course you could rethink it, but you have to have a philosophical basis for it. And what is the reason that you think that it should be? Well, it's just that it happens to have the same number of chromosomes as us. It happens to belong to the same species. But why is that something that's intrinsically morally significant? You have to, I think, point to some feature that grounds a special kind of respect. And at that point, it's a group of cells that grow in a certain kind of way, but there's no element of consciousness. There's no ability to interact with other human beings or have anything but the most rudimentary biological existence. You can't tell the difference between a pig embryo and a human embryo in the way it behaves.
When Gab's in the laboratory with a human embryo in front of him, he knows he's not dealing with a pig embryo. He knows he's dealing with an embryo that has the chance to develop as that child, that much wanted child. He knows that within that little embryo is the complete capacity, all the information required to develop rationality and all the things we value.
In every one of your skin cells there's a complete code.
No, there isn't, because there isn't the capacity for embryogenesis.
But, the point we have to realise that obviously we're discussing about when life begins, and I'll come back to that in a moment, but we're talking about, at best, it's a potential fetus. The majority of embryos we produce, in the very best blastocysts, which have grown to 5 days, look good under the microscope, only 1 in 3 will implant. So we can't call them human beings. At best, they're potential embryos who might then go on to become a fetus and a human being. So I think they're a long way away from a human. Can I just say one thing? I think we're sort of running out of time, and it's really uncanny, because it's 30 years ago in April 1981, I'd made my television debut on the Peter Couchman show, and there was Peter Singer sitting in your chair, and Carl would ask me to go on last minute because he was busy. And that was just after the weekend they first spoke about freezing embryos on the ABC on the Science Show. So for all of a sudden, people thought, well, IVF might be dangerous, and we had this sort of general discussion: when does life begin? And here we are, 30 years later on, we still haven't worked out when life begins, but we still agree to disagree on a lot of things.
Because it's a question I was going to ask, and I suppose in a way it's a yes/no question, although I suspect that's not the answer I'll get here. Is there a way to determine when a human being comes into existence that is not ultimately a religious or some other metaphysical question?
Well, it's very easy. The Jewish people have worked it out. Life for a Jewish mother begins when her son enters medical school.
Right.
Yeah, look, I think you have to ask yourself what really matters in life. And, we've invented this criterion of brain death. We've decided that when people's brains cease to function, that they're now technically dead. In fact, we withdraw life-sustaining treatment from people who are not brain dead but permanently unconscious. That is, we say that their life in an important sense stopped when they stopped being conscious. Well, if you think that what's important is consciousness, then you've got to look at the point where consciousness begins, which isn't until about 20 weeks into gestation. And that's just bare consciousness.
But you accept this is more or less an arbitrary distinction, or is there something absolute and real that we can point to?
Well, you have to, in all of these cases, ask what's our fundamental value. What's the common currency that we can share? All of us can share the common currency of consciousness. When you come to other claims about value, you're starting to look at what minorities value. So it seems to me that the most uncontroversial view is something to do with consciousness.
Final words, Eugenics?
Well, just on the brain death thing, brain death is not about consciousness. Brain death is about the loss of integration of the body. We haven't defined it in terms of consciousness, at least not here. Perhaps they have in the UK, but they haven't here. But in terms of this issue, of course I have to say that this is a matter of metaphysics. It is a matter of the way in which we regard human beings. But the position that I take is that every human being is important, no matter their disability, no matter what stage of life they're at, and that the stage of life that an embryo is at, or the stage of life that an unconscious person is at, a person in an unresponsive state is at, is still part of this existence, part of this life. And so that all human beings are important. All human beings are worthy of our respect and worthy of our love.
Well, in the words of another great moderator, I'm going to draw a line under that discussion and open up to the audience who I can no longer see. So I don't know how to cope with that. There's a hand here. It's about the only hand that I would have a hope of seeing. Oh no, there we go.
People might have to come down if they wanted to.
I'll take. No, they'll have. We've got roving microphones. Okay, so we'll come here first, and then just wait for the microphone, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you. I'm Loan Skeen from the Melbourne Law School.
You were my old health and medical law teacher, by the way.
I thought we'd met.
This is bringing very difficult flashbacks.
I have 3 questions, one for each of the speakers, and I think that perhaps the answers to them might show that these speakers are less far apart than you might think. My first question is to Associate Professor Gab Kovacs, and I ask him, and I'm going to give you the 3 questions first. Who are the people who are currently undertaking pre-implantation genetic diagnosis through IVF? My second question is for Associate Professor Nick Tonti-Filippini, and my question to him is, if you were given the situation that Julian has described, where a couple has gone into the program of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis because for the reason that will be described in response to my first question, and that couple is faced with 3 embryos, and 2 of them have a very serious genetic abnormality, which is why I expect they will be there, and the 3rd one seems to have no health risks. Do you think that the couple should choose the one that has no obvious health risks? My 3rd question is to Professor Savulescu, and he has said that couples should do what they can to have the best children. And I say to him, do you therefore argue that every couple who is planning to have a child should undertake IVF and pre-implantation genetic diagnosis to have their child? And if they have conceived in the ordinary way and it is found through prenatal diagnosis that their child in utero has something wrong with it, do you say they should therefore have an abortion? So if I hear the answers to those 3 questions, I think you may be further together than I think might have appeared.
Well, this will be adventurous. I'll start with you, Cab.
Well, first of all, may I define the terms? We talk about the pre-implantation diagnosis. There's 2 things we do. One is PGD, which is pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, and we do that to avoid various inherited conditions. Not to be confused with PGS, which is screening. And PGS is done by people going through IVF who try to improve their chances of succeeding and having a good embryo implanted. And whether there is really a role for PGS is still being debated. People in Chicago say there is, people in Europe say there isn't. So let's put that to the back. Let's just talk about PGD. And the people who come through and do PGD are basically couples who would risk of passing on a significant genetic disease to their children. The most common, both in Europe and Australia, is screening for cystic fibrosis. So if both couples carry the gene for cystic fibrosis, they want the embryo screened and we only replace unaffected embryos or at worst carriers but not affected children. And there are a number of other diseases which can be screened for in that way. There are some people who have sex selection for medical reasons, for diseases like Huntington's chorea or haemophilia, where only one sex will be affected and not the other. So I think without, I don't want to take any more time. That answer your question?
They're all people with serious
potential diseases. And I again want to say again, if you have PGD, you're not doing a roadworthy on the embryo. We're excluding just that particular disease for which we're looking for, and it does not prevent any other genetic disease, or nor does it prevent developmental abnormality like a hole in the heart or cleft palate, which might still happen in utero.
Nick, your question?
My view is that people shouldn't be in that position in the first place. They ought not be in a position of using PGD in order to screen embryos. Firstly, because there's a loss rate associated with the test itself, and also because it puts them in that situation of using the information in that way, in a discriminatory way. And I don't think that they ought to be choosing the embryos, even if the information is available. I don't think they... No, I didn't say that. I said that I didn't think they should be choosing.
But I think the question's predicated on the given set of facts.
The embryo's in front of you, and what I'm saying is that they shouldn't be choosing. In other words, the best thing you could do if you had the information would be to allow the choice to be made randomly.
Okay.
So there's lots of different reasons we have, and we might have a reason to try to use IVF and PGD, but it has to be balanced against its likely benefits. At the moment, you heard Gab Kovacs say is not a huge benefit to people who don't have an existing genetic disorder. And it's also costly and exposes people to risks, so I don't think that people should be compelled to have IVF today, or even that there's an overriding reason for them. I wouldn't have it if I was going to have a child today. If you find an abnormality, serious abnormality later in pregnancy, should you have an abortion, well, it has to be weighed up against the costs in terms of mental anguish, the kind of physical consequences. There would be a reason, if you were fertile and able to have another child, to consider that, but you have to weigh it up against the likely psychological costs. So you have to balance all of the things that you have operating. But I think we have to take seriously that what some element of that reason is, and we do have a reason to try to have them. And Nick thinks there's absolutely no difference between, as he just illustrated, between an embryo with a devastating disability and a normal one. He thinks you just toss a coin. Now,
I didn't say there's no difference. I said you shouldn't make the choice.
No, well...
I mean, if you're making the choice, then you are discriminating on the basis of disability. I don't think
Well,
that's
let me
right.
get back to my previous question then. If you could use sperm or egg testing, so there was no embryo involved, you weren't selecting between human beings, you were selecting between gametes before the embryo was produced, would you also be against selection in that case? Because here you're not discarding, you're not choosing between people, you're choosing between eggs.
You still have to use an IVF process or an ARD process.
No, you could use sperm injection. Yeah. Let's just say you could just
okay. You're still in the same process that I won't accept.
Right. Okay.
But the
and I think at this stage we'll try to take more questions from the floor than the panel. There's no way I can adjudicate this. Okay.
My question dovetails, I think, quite nicely with preceding discussion. I want to raise a question about choosing between children, as it were. We all of us have a limited number of children. None of us here, I think, has all the children they could have had if they had wanted to. So we always make choices. Now imagine myself 30 years younger, and I have a choice to have a child now, or the next child by using birth control a little bit longer. I also happen to have seen my doctor, and I've been told that from our point of view it would be disadvantageous and would possibly result in a serious disability of the child if he had a child now. So my husband and I, we decide wisely to wait 2 months and to have the child then. So
Can I ask you to come to a question?
Now we have the question is coming, I need to build it up. So
clearly.
So now we have chosen between one child that we didn't conceive 2 months ago, and we have chosen to conceive a child now. The first child would have been seriously disabled, the second child is not. Have we acted in a way that's discriminatory against disabled people? Nick?
I didn't see you come in, Helga, but it's interesting that you're here. And thanks for the question. It is an interesting question, and I guess what makes a large difference to it is that it doesn't involve anything that's morally difficult to arrive at that point of making a selection. And it seems to me that that there isn't a moral issue in delaying in order to try